Borderline personality disorder, as I talk about in my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People Who Hurt Us, it comes from being brought up by parents who are unable to nurture and care for their child. Almost universally, when we look at a borderline adult, we find out that they had a very abusive, neglectful, or traumatic childhood. During those critical years in which a parent is supposed to bond, nurture, and help a child thrive emotionally and physically, these children were brought up in a hostile, sometimes dangerous environment. So when a borderline client starts to look back and try to piece together why and how did they become or develop this disorder, we try to show that they are victims themselves, that they were brought up in an environment where they were perpetually abandoned, they were perpetually neglected, they were perpetually hurt, and in their early development of their psychological coping skills were stunted. Borderlines start their relationships extremely quickly and intensely. Borderlines have an undescribable urge to feel loved and to love their whole life. Going back to those critical years early in their development, they never felt worthy of love and affection and were always experiencing abandonment. So there's this deep hole, this deep chasm of emptiness that borderlines all feel. And when they meet someone that they find attractive, charming, beautiful, something happens, a switch clicks on, and they experience this love that they've always dreamt of so intensely. It's magnified. It is, I would estimate, 5 times the intensity of what normal, regular, typical people feel when they fall in love. And we know that's pretty intense. It all gets traced back to this feeling of emptiness, this feeling of lack of self-worth. And when they meet someone that they feel loves them, and they love them, they get to live in this fantasy world that they've always dreamt of to be loved completely, and they lose themselves. And it happens quickly. Another explanation to that is borderlines usually find partners, as I described in my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, who fit their personality quite well. And typically they're codependents. And these two individuals find comfort in moving fast, especially in a sexual manner in a relationship. And they lose their identities, they lose themselves in the sexual act and mistake that for the normal developmental path that most people have to take to build a relationship. And that happens quickly, and sex becomes the action of connection and love. Borderline personality disordered individuals can be very seductive. They can be very exciting people. In fact, it is difficult if you don't know that person to spot this disorder, because they seem so wonderfully happy, so wonderfully upbeat, so wonderfully positive. They connect so deeply and intensely. It's very alluring. It brings in the type of people that themselves are empty, are sad, are lonely, or who have poor self-esteem. Like I say, and I've said in my trainings in my book, it is two people that fit together perfectly, like a dance couple. The borderline and their partner find a sense of comfort and release of sadness, pain, and anxiety in the relationship. And if you are that partner who finds the borderline beautiful, attractive, and charming, and you are also suffering from loneliness and poor self-esteem, it is a very quick and compelling experience. And that is why the relationships with the borderline and their partner often happen so quickly and explosively. But if we're looking at what I would call a healthy or developed individual, and they meet a borderline, they're going to sense that something's wrong, because healthy individuals or balanced individuals take their time and don't jump deep into a relationship and don't lose themselves. They have what I call emotional and physical boundaries that are up that are up until they get to know that person, and little by little, progressively, they move forward and they let go. But the borderline and their partner, it happens explosively, sometimes in an instant, and to that partner, it's compelling. When a borderline and a codependent meet, it is a potent connection. It is a connection that feeds that which is missing in both people. They share this deep sense of loneliness, this existential void, this feeling of emptiness. Although they're very different clinically and diagnostically, both suffer from a sense of deeply embedded shame. And when two people who are suffering and needing someone to take that pain away, and they meet, it's an explosive event. In an article that I wrote for the Huffington Post, which is called Relationship Math, I explained that codependents and borderlines are really underdeveloped people. So I use the term half individuals, because a full individual, a person who has good self-esteem, has a well-developed self-concept, was loved and nurtured as a child, is a fully autonomous and independent person, and when they meet someone, there's an interdependency in the relationship. But the borderline and the codependent, who are half-developed, find each other and finally, for the first time, feel good about themselves. And that is part of the euphoria that I talked about earlier that draws them into the relationship in this dance of explosive, almost drug-like feelings of euphoria. And that is, and until the borderline and the codependent address that parts of their life, whether in the present or in the past, that makes them feel empty and alone, they are going to be highly susceptible to this behavior, to this personality type. Borderline personality disorders categorize as a personality disorder. And although all the personality disorders, and I believe there's 9, are very, very different, they all share a few central traits. And one of those traits is a lack of insight into the problem or the disorder. It's not that they're in denial, they just can't see it. So a borderline often will refuse psychotherapy, will not believe they need psychotherapy or psychiatric help because they don't recognize the problem in themselves. They tend to project onto others what they can't accept in their own selves. For example, if they feel someone hurt them, they will blame them for being mean and judgmental, when in fact that's a part of themselves that they're too fragile to actually admit or understand. So when we're looking at trying to get borderlines help, and there is help, there's really good therapy out there, good treatment, the challenge is getting them into therapy, because the borderline, whose central theme is abandonment, if you suggest to a borderline in a loving way, sweetie, honey, I really think you need help, you should, why don't you go get therapy? The borderline, who is so filled with dread of the possibility of being abandoned, hears, you're broken and you're not worth my love. And they react with a rage and anger. They don't hear the empathetic, altruistic nature. They respond to it as someone is abandoning them or judging them. As such, they don't see it as an invitation and will not go into therapy. And shame and denial is a central element of why they do not seek therapy, because the shame that is embedded deeply in the unconscious, or at the center of the psyche, like most of the personality disorders, is too painful to feel, so it's relegated to the unconscious. And as such, they cannot recognize it, they can't acknowledge it, so they blame other people and don't see it in themselves. Without a recognition of the deeper elements of their psychopathology or their psychological problems, getting them into therapy is often very difficult.